You know, we walk around every single day with this really unshakable assumption that we are like the conscious authors of our own
Oh,
life.
totally. The illusion of control.
Right. We tell ourselves that every decision we make, every mood we project, every little interaction we have is something we are actively and intentionally choosing. Like, I decided to be productive today, or, I decided to be annoyed by that one specific email.
Yeah, we think we're the ones driving the car.
Exactly. But what if that is just entirely an illusion? What if you aren't actually this hyper-rational agent driving a meat suit, but rather you are essentially, and I love this framing, a highly intelligent houseplant?
A houseplant with a mortgage.
Right. Just this biological organism blindly responding to the local ecology around you, like moving towards sunlight and shrinking away from toxicity without even realizing it.
It completely shatters the whole lens through which we view human behavior. I mean, the idea that we're constantly detecting signals, these invisible cues in our environment, and that these signals are dictating our physical and emotional reality, well, long before our conscious brains even get a vote.
It's kind of terrifying, but also freeing,
It is. It shifts the entire burden of why we feel the way we do.
which is such a relief, honestly. And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. Today, we are exploring the really groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting work of Dr. Stephen Porges. He's the creator of Polyvagal Theory.
Right, a true pioneer in the field.
Yeah, and we are basing our analysis today on this massive, incredibly revealing interview he did recently with Chris Williamson. Through this, we're going to decode the actual biological mechanics of why you might feel anxious all the time.
Yes.
We're looking at how our nervous systems are basically secretly running the show beneath the surface, and crucially, how we can essentially exercise our way back to a baseline of safety.
And for anyone listening who is, dealing with burnout or mysterious physical exhaustion, or just a baseline level of overwhelm navigating the modern world, this information is vital.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
moves the conversation away from what is wrong with my character
Mm.
to what is my biology reacting to. We're going to give you a framework that changes how you view your reactions, your sensitivity, and really your resilience.
So let's jump straight into the core conflict here, because Porges's biological reality, it violently collides with the water we are all swimming in right now.
Oh, the grind culture.
Yes, modern grind culture. In the world of personal development, corporate leadership, social media, the overarching mantra is basically forget your feelings, just work harder.
Right. Push through the pain.
Exactly. If you're tired, anxious, or overwhelmed, the cultural mandate is to just suppress it, muscle through the friction, and, force your success into existence.
And Dr. Porges approaches this with a lot of nuance, which is great. He acknowledges that in a meritocracy, having agency, that belief that I can conquer this obstacle, is actually a positive psychological trait.
Sure, it gets things done.
Right. It drives innovation. But the massive caveat he introduces is that this forget your feelings mentality is fundamentally at war with our biological hardware.
We're fighting our own bodies.
We really are. We build these elaborate narratives of control, telling ourselves we are, mastering our destiny, while our physiological systems are actually drowning in the challenges of the environment.
We wait until the entire system crashes to even admit we were overwhelmed in the first place. And Porges points out that this ability to suppress our feelings is technically an adaptive trait, right? Like, we evolved to push through dynamically changing, dangerous environments to survive.
Yeah, if a tiger is chasing you, you don't stop because your feet hurt.
Exactly. But we have completely lost the intuitive skill set of knowing when our body has run out of resilience. It reminds me of a car dashboard. You're driving down the highway, and the check engine light starts flashing bright red.
The universal sign of panic.
Right. And the forget your feelings cultural approach is the equivalent of taking a piece of opaque, black electrical tape, sticking it directly over the warning light, and just pressing the accelerator harder to make up for lost time.
That tape analogy highlights exactly what happens inside the body. When you do that, you are actively severing a neurophysiological feedback loop.
Okay, unpack that. What exactly is a feedback loop in this context?
So to understand the danger there, we have to look at the mechanics. Your body has sensory pathways. These are called afferent nerves that act as an internal surveillance system.
Afferent with an A.
Yes, afferent. And they are constantly monitoring everything. Your heart rate, the tension in your gut, your inflammatory markers, your oxygen levels. They send all this raw data up to the brain.
Like a massive fiber optic cable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the brain processes it and then sends commands back down through efferent nerves with an E dictating your Motor actions, your hormone release, your behavior.
Okay, so up is offerent, down is efferent.
Right. So when you force yourself to go numb, when you drink that fourth cold brew to ignore the nausea of a deadline, you are literally shutting off that upward pipeline of surveillance data. You're flying a commercial jet with the radar turned entirely off.
And doing that long term just destroys the machinery. Porges actually uses Austin, Texas as the ultimate cautionary tale for this.
Oh yeah, he calls it the patient zero of the modern success track.
Ground zero for high achievers, startup founders, and relentless accumulators. And the paradox he observes there is that these people are chasing acquisition, right? Wealth, influence, physical optimization. And they're doing it specifically to give themselves the sensation of feeling good.
Right, they're trying to outrun internal feelings of inadequacy.
But in that relentless pursuit, by constantly taping over that check engine light and destroying their internal feedback loops, they have biologically denied their nervous system the capacity to ever actually experience the feeling of safety and joy they were chasing in the first place.
It creates a devastating circularity. You accumulate vast resources, but your biology is literally too damaged to enjoy them.
It's so ironic.
It is. And Porges asks this piercing question about it. What is the actual goal of human life? I mean, is it just blind acquisition? Or is it curiosity, learning, benevolence, connection?
Things that require a functioning nervous system.
Exactly. Our species is biologically wired to explore, to play, to co-regulate with others. If you build an empire but you lose the physiological curiosity that enables your nervous system to thrive, you haven't won the game. You've just misread the manual for living entirely.
But, wait, let me just inject some friction here. I hear all of this and it makes sense in a vacuum. But practically speaking, I have a mortgage.
Right, real life.
Yeah, people listening have bosses, deadlines, kids who need to get to school. Isn't a certain level of physiological suppression mandatory for a functioning society? I mean, if we listen to every single whim, every minor ache or slight feeling of fatigue, wouldn't we just, stay in bed all day? We can't just tell our boss, sorry, my efferent nerves are feeling overwhelmed today.
That is easily the most common pushback to polyvagal theory. And honestly, it stems from a profound misunderstanding of what the body actually wants.
What do you mean?
Your body is not trying to make you lazy. It has zero interest in keeping you in bed forever. The body's ultimate goal is homeostasis, a state of dynamic, efficient balance, so that you can go out, explore, forage, and connect safely.
So it wants to be active.
Yes. When the body signals fatigue, it's just asking for a temporary recalibration.
Yeah.
It's trying to avoid a catastrophic structural failure down the line. It's trying to keep you alive and optimized, not unemployed.
So it's about trusting the machinery rather than constantly fighting it.
Exactly.
Which leads us to how Porges even uncovered this machinery in the first place. Because to find this underlying survival system, he had to completely buck the scientific consensus of his time.
Oh, he really did. We have to travel back to the scientific landscape of the 1990s to appreciate how radical his work was.
Set the scene for us.
So, the field of psychology and physiology back then was heavily polarized. On one extreme, you had strict mechanistic behaviorism.
Just rats in mazes.
Right. It was all about stimulus and response. Ring a bell, measure the reaction time, map the observable behavior. It treated the human basically like a simple input-output machine.
And then on the other extreme, you had pure psychoanalysis. The idea was that everything lived in the mind, completely divorced from the physical meat of the body. Like, if you had a problem, you laid on a couch and talked about your childhood.
Yeah, the physical body was largely treated as an irrelevant vehicle for the mind, unless you had, a visible bleeding wound.
But Porges wasn't buying either of those.
No, he found both approaches completely lacking. He wasn't interested in measuring reaction times, and he didn't believe the mind operated independently of the organs. He wanted to know what was happening behind the facial expressions.
The actual biology of emotion.
Right. What was the internal physiological state of a human being when they were engaging with the world? And to answer that, he started monitoring the physiological responses of highly vulnerable patients. He ended up in the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, working with premature babies.
Wow.
And that is where he encountered an anomaly that basically shattered the existing textbooks.
Okay, so what did the textbooks say about the nervous system back then? What was the accepted truth?
Science essentially recognized two main gears. First, the sympathetic nervous system. This is your classic fight-or-flight response. Adrenaline, high heart rate, mobilization. It's the system that prepares you to run from danger.
The gas pedal.
Exactly. And second, you had the parasympathetic nervous system, which was widely accepted as the rest and digest system. This was governed by the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve was viewed as the good nerve. It calms you down, slows your heart rate, and promotes cellular health and growth.
So you have the gas pedal for stress and the brake pedal for calm. Simple enough, right?
Right.
But in the NICU, Porges is watching these tiny, incredibly vulnerable premature babies, and he sees something terrifying that contradicts that entire binary model.
Yeah. He witnessed a phenomenon he later coined the vagal
The
paradox.
vagal paradox.
Right. He would observe these babies experiencing stress. Predictably, their sympathetic system would kick in. Their heart rates would spike into tachycardia as they tried to mobilize energy. That made sense.
Fight or flight, even in an incubator.
Yes. But then, as the stress overwhelmed them, their defensive strategy would completely shift. The supposedly good, calming vagal system would engage to slow the heart rate down. But it would slow down so aggressively and so massively that it compromised the oxygen supply to the baby's brain.
Oh my.
The calming nerve was literally triggering a lethal shutdown.
Okay, you just lost me. If a nerve evolved over millions of years to calm a baby down and promote growth, how on earth is it killing them in the NICU? That makes zero evolutionary sense. How can a system designed for health be lethal?
Right. A neonatologist actually wrote to Porges at the time saying, well, maybe too much of a good thing is just bad.
That's such a weak explanation.
Porges thought so too. He vehemently rejected it. Biology doesn't work like a cartoon where a healing potion accidentally poisons you if you drink too much of it.
Right, evolution doesn't make those kinds of sloppy mistakes.
Exactly. Biological systems are highly conserved and highly specific. If a nerve is shutting down an organism's heart rate to the point of death, it isn't making a mistake. It is executing a very specific primitive defense program.
So where did that program come from?
To figure that out, Porges had to look away from human medicine entirely. He had to dive deep into phylogeny, the evolutionary history of species.
He went all the way back to the evolutionary split between reptiles and mammals, which I find just fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. Think about a reptile survival strategy. A sea turtle or a lizard lays its eggs in the sand, buries them, and just leaves.
They're terrible parents.
The worst. The moment that baby reptile hatches, it is entirely on its own. It has to regulate its own temperature, find its own food, and hide from predators from minute one.
Okay, and if a predator approaches...
The reptile's ultimate defense mechanism is to freeze. It drops its heart rate, stops breathing, and essentially plays dead, just hoping the predator loses interest. That is a massive, deliberate, physiological shutdown.
Wow, okay. But mammals took a wildly different path.
Completely different. Mammals do not hatch and run. They are born highly underdeveloped, and they absolutely must nurse. A mammalian infant cannot survive a single day without the active care and proximity of a parent.
So they can't just play dead.
Exactly. Because of that critical dependency, mammals could not rely on the reptile's defense strategy. I mean, if a baby mammal freezes and plays dead every time it gets uncomfortable, it will never signal its mother, it will never nurse, and it will die.
That makes total sense.
So mammals had to evolve an entirely new autonomic signaling system, a biological way to broadcast, I am here, I need you, and I am safe to approach.
And this realization is the absolute bedrock of polyvagal theory. Porges maps this out and discovers we don't just have two gears, gas and brake. We have a biological hierarchy of three distinct autonomic circuits.
Yes, 3 tiers.
And understanding these 3 tiers is the key to decoding every mood and reaction we have. So let's break them down, starting from the oldest evolutionary hardware.
The first and most primitive tier is that ancient, unmyelinated dorsal vagus. This is the hardware we share with those early reptiles.
Okay.
It originates in the lower brainstem. Its day-to-day job is basically subterranean organ regulation, like keeping your gut moving. But when you are faced with a massive, inescapable threat, this system acts as the ultimate emergency brake.
The reptile freeze.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It triggers that ancient reptile freeze response. It drops your blood pressure, slows your heart, and creates profound immobilization.
Hold on, you called it the unmyelinated dorsal vagus. I know the vagus nerve is this massive superhighway of nerves wandering through the body, but what does unmyelinated actually mean?
That's a great question, and it's crucial for understanding how slow and primitive this system is. Imagine the power cord for your laptop.
Okay.
Inside, you have the copper wire carrying the electricity, and outside you have that thick rubber coating. That rubber acts as an insulator, ensuring the electrical signal travels incredibly fast and doesn't leak out.
Right.
In biology, that rubber coating is called myelin. The ancient dorsal vagus does not have that myelin sheath. It is like a bare, raw wire.
Oh, wow.
Because of that, the signals travel very slowly. It is a slow, blunt instrument.
That makes perfect sense. So tier 1 is the slow, unmyelinated freeze response.
Mm-hmm.
Then we move up the evolutionary ladder to tier 2, the
Yeah.
sympathetic nervous system.
Right. This is the mobilization system. It emerged later to give organisms the ability to take action, fight or flight. Adrenaline, cortisol, increased heart rate. It's the system that gets your muscles ready to outrun a threat.
And for decades, science just stopped there, freeze or run. But then comes tier 3, which Porges calls the mammalian upgrade. I love that term.
It is an upgrade. Tier 3 is the new myelinated ventral vagus. Ventral meaning it runs along the front of the body, the belly side.
Okay.
Because it has that myelin insulation, that biological rubber coating, it is incredibly fast and highly coordinated.
Yeah.
But what makes this system revolutionary is where it connects. It doesn't just go to your heart and lungs. It physically wires into the muscles of your face, your vocal cords, your inner ear, and your head.
It is quite literally a biological broadcasting system.
Yes.
It takes the internal state of your organs and projects it outward to the world via your facial expressions and the tone of your voice.
And equally important, it allows you to read those exact same signals in others. It is a social engagement system. It allows mammals to co-regulate. It's what lets a mother soothe a crying baby just by making eye contact and humming.
Which fundamentally changes how we view human interaction. Like, we don't just have to shut down or run away to manage stress. We can actively interact our way into calmness.
Exactly.
There's this brilliant example in the source material about how humans instinctively interact with dogs that just proves this system is hardwired.
Oh, I love this part.
Think about what happens when you meet a puppy. You don't walk up and use your flat, monotone, professional boardroom voice. No one says, "Hello, dog, I am pleased to make your acquaintance."
No, never.
You automatically, unconsciously switch to this high-pitched, melodic, sing-song voice, like, "Who's a good boy?" You naturally adopt the exact same acoustic frequencies that mothers use to calm their newborns.
Because your nervous system is instinctively trying to trigger the dog's ventral vagal system and your own in the process. You are utilizing ancient mammalian hardware.
It's just built into us.
It is. Chris Williamson actually brings up a viral video of a golden retriever on a couch that illustrates perfectly how fast the system works.
Oh, right, the biterist video.
Yes. The dog's dad puts his hand near the dog's face, and the dog immediately engages in rough play baring its teeth, mock biting, highly mobilized. But the instant the mom puts her hand down, the dog stops, melts, and just gently rests its chin in her palm. And the dog is switching back and forth, bite, rest, every 2 seconds, depending on whose hand is there.
Yeah.
The dog isn't rationally deciding how to act. Its nervous system is continuously reading the subtle safety signals from the different humans and adjusting its biological state instantly.
The implication of this is just massive. If this myelinated ventral vagal system is built entirely to seek connection and co-regulation, it means that safety is not just some nice psychological preference or a luxury.
It's physiological.
Right. Safety is a hardwired biological requirement for our bodies to function without degrading.
That is the turning point of Porges' theory. Safety is biological. But to understand how to achieve it, we have to completely redefine what the word safety actually means, because our modern society has the definition entirely backwards. We operate under the assumption that safety equals the removal of a threat.
Right, the classic example. A school has a problem with violence, so they install a metal detector at the front door. The threat of a weapon entering the building is heavily reduced. Therefore, society declares the children are now safe.
But polyvagal theory makes it glaringly obvious that the absence of a threat does not equal the presence of safety. A nervous system does not look at a metal detector and feel calm.
No, it feels anxious.
Exactly. The mammalian nervous system actively requires the presence of specific safety signals to shift out of a defensive state. It needs to see smiling faces, particularly the contraction of the orbicularis oculi muscles.
The what muscle?
The ones around the eyes that create crow's feet when someone smiles genuinely. You can't fake those. It needs to see those, and it needs to hear those melodic prosodic voices.
An imposing metal detector and a stern security guard actually broadcast danger, even if they are removing a weapon. The environment is signaling you are in a war zone.
Exactly. And this biological definition of safety brings us to the profound tragedy of the traumatized nervous system.
This part is so heavy, but so important.
When we view trauma through a polyvagal lens, we aren't just talking about bad memories. We are talking about a physical nervous system that has had its biological signaling wires crossed.
Walk us through how that actually happens in the body. Like, how does the hardware get confused?
Let's use the example of a child whose primary caregiver, their biological parent, was abusive. From an evolutionary standpoint, a child's nervous system is desperate to relax and feel good when it sees a smiling face or hears a soft, melodic voice.
Because that is the biological promise of a parent.
Right. But if, in this child's experience, those soothing cues were historically used as a manipulation tactic right before an episode of violence, the nervous system adapts. It literally rewires its associations.
Oh, man. So the feeling of vulnerability, the literal physical sensation of the heart rate slowing down and the muscles relaxing, gets neurologically paired with incoming trauma.
Yes. The lower brainstem begins to feel that initial wave of calm. But the higher cortical structures, the memory centers, immediately intervene. They send a massive alarm signal saying, "Abort! I remember this feeling of relaxation. The last time we dropped our guard like this, we were attacked."
Wow.
So the brain actually sabotages the vagal system's attempt to calm the body down and forces a massive spike in sympathetic arousal to prepare for a fight.
That is incredibly tragic. The very signals of safety that are meant to heal them, a loving tone, a gentle touch, actually trigger a physiological panic attack.
Yes.
To a severely traumatized nervous system, a person broadcasting safety can literally feel like a predator luring them into a trap.
It recontextualizes so much of human behavior. I mean, you can't just tell someone to calm down or be rational if their underlying biology is screaming that they're in mortal danger.
Right.
There's a brilliant visual analogy discussed in the source to illustrate how we subconsciously read these states in others. Imagine you're standing on the sidewalk next to a schoolyard.
Okay, picturing it.
In the first scenario, you see a group of children sprinting around, screaming, chasing each other in a game of tag. They are highly mobilized. They are burning energy. But because their faces are joyful and their screams have a playful, rhythmic cadence, your own nervous system feels completely at ease watching them.
You might even smile watching them play.
Right. But in the second scenario, imagine you see children sprinting out of that exact same school building in sheer terror. They're doing the exact same physical action running.
But the context is entirely different.
Exactly. Their faces are pulled tight with panic, their eyes are wide, and their screams are erratic and high-pitched. When you observe that second scenario, your own body experiences an immediate visceral reaction. Your stomach drops, your heart rate spikes, your muscles tense.
Just from watching them.
Yes. The physical action of the children is identical. But the facial and vocal cues, the data transmitted by their ventral vagal systems, change the biological impact on the observer entirely. Your nervous system is constantly reading their nervous system in a continuous subconscious dialogue.
Which pushes us into some really uncomfortable territory about human identity. I mean, if our emotional reactions, our comfort levels, and our social behaviors are largely just biological reflexes to external signals, how much of what we call our personality is actually just a physiological state that got retuned?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like someone who identifies as a highly sensitive person or a pessimist, are we mistaking a chronic, locked-in defensive state for a permanent character trait?
Dr. Porges leans heavily into this provocative idea. He suggests that many of the labels we use for personality traits are essentially just descriptions of where an individual's nervous system habitually rests.
Wow.
If your autonomic nervous system got locked into a state of hypervigilance early in life, your conscious brain creates a narrative to explain it. You say, "I'm just a quiet, anxious person who doesn't like crowds." But in reality, your biology is just trapped in a sympathetic stress response, and because we don't understand the physiology, we slap a personality label on it and assume it is fixed.
But what is crucial to understand here, and this is where the conversation takes a massive pivot, is that we don't just get locked into these defensive states by psychological trauma.
No, not at all.
A bad childhood isn't the only trigger. We can get our nervous systems permanently jammed by physical trauma, biological threats. Which brings us right to the door of the modern medical crisis, post-viral syndromes, chronic illness, and the profound loss of resilience.
We always culturally separate the emotional from the physical, right? As if they are two distinct buckets.
Yeah, mental health over here, physical health over there.
But Porges shares a personal story that proves how intertwined they are. He is a highly social, tenured academic. He thrives on public speaking and interaction.
His baseline is very ventral vagal.
Exactly. But then he contracted a severe case of pneumonia, And suddenly, as his body fought this physical pathogen, he found he could no longer handle crowds. His sensory threshold just plummeted.
Wow.
The sound of a busy room felt overwhelming. He just wanted to withdraw into a dark, quiet room.
His biology, fighting a physical war in his lungs, forced his nervous system into a state of social isolation to conserve energy.
Which is a perfectly adaptive response in the short term. When you are sick, your body drops into that older dorsal vagal state to immobilize you and save metabolic resources.
Because fighting a virus is exhausting.
Right. But the crisis occurs when the immune system eventually wins the war against the virus. But the autonomic nervous system never gets the memo that the battle is over.
And this leads us to the most harrowing part of the source material. The interviewer, Chris Williamson, details his own agonizing 9-month health journey, and it perfectly illustrates this biological trap.
It's a brutal story.
He battled a cascading series of invisible illnesses: long COVID, mold toxicity, Lyme disease, Epstein-Barr cytomegalovirus. And the fallout wasn't just that he felt sleepy. His nervous system completely unraveled. He was so exhausted by 7 p.m. that he couldn't function, but no amount of sleep made him feel restored.
The hallmark of his experience was severe sensory intolerance. He described not being able to stand the smell of standing water in his house. He couldn't handle complete silence because it made him anxious, but he also couldn't tolerate the stimulus of music.
Just totally trapped.
His nervous system had lost all flexibility. It was hypervigilant, treating almost every sensory input as a massive incoming threat.
His window of tolerance basically shrank to the size of a pinhole, and the absolute peak of this medical nightmare for him was undergoing the tilt table test. This part is terrifying. Walk us through exactly what this test is and what it is measuring.
So the tilt table test is a diagnostic tool used to measure autonomic flexibility, specifically how well your nervous system manages blood pressure and heart rate when fighting gravity.
Okay.
You're strapped flat onto a medical table, you're covered in blood pressure cuffs, heart rate monitors, and you have an IV line in your arm. The critical rule is that you are not allowed to move a single muscle voluntarily. You can't even wiggle your toes.
Because if you move your leg muscles, they act as mechanical pumps, right? To push blood back up to your heart.
Exactly. They want to see what the autonomic nervous system does entirely on its own without muscular help. So they tilt the table up to a 70-degree angle. Suddenly, gravity is pulling all your blood down into your legs and abdomen.
Which would normally make you pass out.
Right. But in a healthy person, specialized sensors in the blood vessels called baroreceptors instantly detect the drop in blood pressure. They send a rapid signal to the brain, and the nervous system immediately tightens the blood vessels and slightly increases the heart rate to ensure oxygenated blood keeps reaching the brain.
But because Chris's autonomic nervous system was so chronically dysregulated from months of fighting pathogens, his baroreceptors failed to adjust.
Around 5 minutes into the tilt, he starts sweating profusely and feeling nauseous. He tries to use his conscious, mind-like meditation and breath work to push through the discomfort.
Trying to hack his way out of it.
Yeah, but the biological hardware is failing. At 9 minutes, his vision blurs. At 10 minutes, his brain realizes it is starving for oxygen. So the primitive dorsal vagal system pulls the emergency brake.
The reptile freeze.
Exactly. It triggers vasovagal syncope. It purposely tanks his blood pressure and stops his heart momentarily to force him to pass out.
Wait, passing out is a defense mechanism.
Yes. Think about it. If you faint and collapse to the floor, you are suddenly horizontal again. Gravity is no longer pulling the blood away from your brain. It is the body's ultimate, desperate maneuver to restore blood flow to the cortex.
That is wild.
Chris completely blacks out. And when he regains consciousness on the table, the very first thing the medical staff says to him is, "Okay, so your heart stopped for 5 seconds."
Which is just a horrifying thing to hear upon waking up, but it vividly illustrates what Porges calls sentinel trauma.
Yes, sentinel trauma.
The pathogen, the COVID virus, the mold spores, the Lyme bacteria, acted as a mortal threat to the organism. The body fought the pathogen and technically survived. The blood work might even show the virus is totally gone, but the nervous system sustained sentinel trauma.
It remembers.
It remains locked in a rigid, chronic state of defense, constantly waiting for the next attack. It hardens into a response pattern of continuous, invisible war.
It fundamentally breaks the choreography of the systems. Patients with long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome aren't just dealing with a lack of energy, they are dealing with a severe regulatory disorder.
Right.
Their system is frantically flip-flopping between hyperarousal panic attacks, racing heart, sweating, and hypoarousal, profound exhaustion, brain fog, and just shutting down entirely.
It's like surviving a horrific multi-car pileup on the highway. Like, if you survive a massive physical crash, society completely understands why you are terrified to get back behind the wheel of a car the next day. They grant you grace for that emotional trauma.
Sure, they give you space.
But when you survive a severe pathogen, society completely lacks the narrative language to understand biological trauma. Your friends and colleagues just say, come on, you've been resting for weeks, get back into the flow, everyone is a little tired.
Just tape over the check engine light.
Exactly. They dismiss the fact that your cellular hardware experienced a mortal threat and is trapped in a defensive state.
And that cultural dismissal is incredibly isolating. It actually compounds the trauma because now the person feels biologically unsafe and socially unsupported.
It's a double whammy.
So the burning question for Chris Williamson and for millions of people suffering right now is, how do we fix the hardware?
Yeah.
How do we convince the brainstem that the pathogen is gone, the war is over, and it is safe to expand that window of tolerance?
And this brings us to the actual interventions. But before we dive into the specific tools, Porges draws a hard line in the sand regarding our modern obsession with biohacking.
Oh, he hates the hacking mentality.
Right. In our culture, we want a shortcut for everything. We want a pill to cure anxiety or like a vagal nerve stimulator device that we can clip to our ear to artificially force our system into calmness, all while we continue to work 80 hours a week in a toxic job.
Just trying to cheat the system.
Porges says you cannot hack the nervous system. It is far too intelligent to be tricked like that.
If you try to artificially force your body to be calm while you remain in a toxic, demanding, or dangerous environment, your highly adaptive nervous system will recognize the mismatch.
It knows you're faking it.
Yes. It will realize you are suppressing vital warning signals, and it will actually shut down those feedback loops to protect you from your own hacking. You cannot force safety. Instead of hacking, Porges insists we have to view this as exercising the nervous system.
It's about progressive overload, just like lifting weights. You gently challenge the autonomic nervous system, introduce a manageable stressor, and then allow it to recover and realize it survived. You widen the window of tolerance millimeter by millimeter.
And Porges himself models this perfectly.
Yeah, at 81 years old.
Every single morning, he goes down to his basement and uses an inversion table. He straps himself in, tilts downward at a steep angle, does sit-ups, and then he rhythmically tilts the table up and down on each breath, doing this about 30 times.
What he's doing mechanically is actively stressing those exact same baroreceptors that failed Chris Williamson on the tilt table.
Exactly.
By rapidly changing his orientation to gravity, he is forcing his vascular system to detect the blood pressure changes, send the signal to the brain, and adjust the tension in the blood vessels. He is deliberately pushing the system slightly off balance and letting it recover, continually proving to his own brain that his biological hardware is resilient.
Which is incredibly badass for an 81-year-old.
Right. But physical movement isn't the only way in. We also have to look at acoustic interventions, which is arguably where Porges' clinical work has been the most revolutionary.
The safe and sound protocol.
Yes, he developed the Safe and Sound protocol. This is a targeted acoustic intervention that uses specialized, algorithmically filtered music. The algorithm strips away the extreme high and low pitches and isolates the specific acoustic frequency band between 1500 and 3500 hertz.
And the significance of that specific frequency band brings us right back to evolutionary biology.
How so?
1500 to 3500 hertz is the exact frequency range of human speech, specifically the melodic, prosodic tones a mother uses to soothe a baby. It is the biological channel of mammalian social communication.
And what's fascinating is that it's also the exact same frequency band that dogs, cats, and horses use to broadcast safety, which suddenly explains the entire history of human-animal partnership.
It really does.
We didn't just domesticate these specific animals because they were useful. We bonded with them because our nervous systems literally speak the exact same biological language of calm. A purring cat or a sighing dog hits the human ear at the precise frequency required to trigger the ventral vagus nerve.
And to understand why this works, we have to look at the micromechanics of the human ear. Inside your middle ear, you have tiny muscles, the stapedius and the tensor tympani.
Okay, tiny ear muscles.
When you are in a state of safety, these muscles actually tighten. This tension acts like an acoustic filter. It dampens low-frequency background noises, which evolutionarily sound like the low rumble of a predator or thunder, and it amplifies the mid-range frequencies, of human speech.
Wait, think about that applied to daily life. Think about being at a noisy, crowded restaurant. Have you ever been sitting there trying to listen to the person across from you, and suddenly you feel incredibly agitated, overwhelmed, and you just want to escape?
Oh, all the time. Sensory overload.
We usually tell ourselves, I'm just being introverted today.
Right.
But biologically, what is happening is that your middle ear muscles are fatiguing or failing to filter out the low-frequency roar of the restaurant.
Yes.
Because those muscles are directly wired to the facial nerve and the vagus nerve, they send an active predator threat signal straight to your brainstem. Your body is doing a miniature version of what Chris experienced on the tilt table. It is perceiving mortal danger in the Olive Garden.
That is a perfect real-world application. Porges proved the power of these frequencies by testing his filtered music in a preschool for children with autism and behavioral challenges.
What happened?
When the algorithm was active piping in only those safe mammalian frequencies, the children's middle ear muscles engaged properly. They naturally gravitated toward the speakers, made eye contact, and became highly social and interactive.
Wow.
But when he turned the algorithm off and played the exact same music with the low and high frequencies included, the children immediately withdrew, became solitary, and disconnected. Their nervous systems instantly recognized the shift from safety to potential threat.
But there is a very dark, very critical caveat to this acoustic intervention. When Porges first developed it, he thought, this is the magic bullet. We'll just play these loving, melodic sounds for everyone and cure trauma.
But it wasn't that simple.
No. When they administered the Safe and Sound protocol to severely traumatized individuals, some of them had catastrophic defensive reactions.
Because, as we discussed earlier with the abusive parent, trauma crosses the wires. If the person who abused you spoke in a soft, melodic voice right before inflicting pain, your nervous system has retuned that specific 1500 to 3500 hertz frequency to mean imminent danger.
The biological cue for safety was weaponized.
Exactly. So when clinical therapists use the Safe and Sound protocol with trauma survivors, they have to do it agonizingly slowly. Sometimes they only play the music for a few seconds at a time, closely monitoring the patient alongside a safe therapist to gently tease open that window of tolerance without triggering a massive panic response.
The intensity of those reactions actually led Porges to develop a second acoustic intervention designed specifically for highly traumatized people called the Rest and Restore Protocol, or stealth meditation.
Stealth meditation.
I love this concept because it acknowledges something we rarely talk about. Standard meditation can be terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
If you take someone with severe PTSD and tell them to sit perfectly still in a silent room, close their eyes, and focus on their breath, you are essentially forcing them into immobilization.
And immobilization triggers the ancient dorsal vagal freeze response. The silence makes them feel incredibly vulnerable, like prey waiting in the open. They cannot tolerate the stillness.
It's too much.
So stealth meditation bypasses the human element entirely. It uses low-frequency rhythmic sounds that mimic the sensation of floating in a primordial sea. It's like being in a gentle, rhythmic cradle.
No human voices.
Right. There are no human voices, no implied social pressure to make eye contact or connect. It just provides the bare biological signal of floating safely, allowing the nervous system to rest without the threat of human interaction.
And when you combine these acoustic signals with physical interventions, you get to breathing. But not just any breathing. The source discusses resonance breathing. This is a highly specific protocol where you breathe at a rate of roughly 4.5 to 5.5 breaths per minute. That translates mathematically to about 0.1 hertz.
And the reason that specific 0.1 hertz pace is so profoundly effective is that it aligns with the natural oscillations of your vascular bed.
Explain that.
Your blood vessels have a natural rhythmic expansion and contraction. When you slow your breathing down to exactly match that rhythm, you create a resonance frequency. You entrain the rhythms of the heart, the lungs, and the brainstem, forcing the entire system into a highly efficient state of homeostasis.
But I want to push on the actual mechanics of these interventions, like whether it's the tilt table, the filtered music, or the resonance breathing. The physical action itself isn't the whole magic trick, right?
No, it's not.
There is this staggering statistic Porges drops in the interview. He points out that 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are efferent, meaning they are sensory fibers sending data up from the body to the brain. Only 20% of the fibers are efferent, sending commands down to the organs.
That 80-20 split is the key to everything. It proves that the vagus nerve is primarily a surveillance system, not a command system.
So Does this mean that when we do these exercises, the healing isn't necessarily coming from the mechanical movement of the diaphragm or the inner ear?
Hmm.
Is the magic actually in forcing our conscious brain to finally feel the body again? Are we essentially using the exercise to unclog that 80% upward pipeline of information that we've been taping over our whole lives?
That is a profound way to look at it. You are completing the sensory feedback loop.
Hmm.
Porges gives a great example of how we usually sabotage this. Think about going to the gym. People get on a treadmill to exercise their heart. But immediately, they put on headphones, blast aggressive music, and stare at a TV screen. By doing that, they are purposefully distracting their brain from the physical sensation of the effort. They are dampening the sensory information coming from their body.
It's just zoning out.
Right. To truly build autonomic resilience, you have to practice interoception. You have to go into the resonance breathing or the physical exertion and actively feel your chest expanding.
Yeah.
Feel your heart rate increasing, then slowing down. You have to consciously allow those neural circuits to send that vital surveillance data up to the brain. You're actively proving to your brainstem that the body is capable, functioning, and safe.
We have to rebuild the connection from the body up. We cannot think our way into safety. We have to feel our way there. And the consequences of ignoring this mind-body connection aren't just feeling a bit anxious. The physical manifestations are brutal. This isn't esoteric energy healing. This is pure mechanical hardware. Let's look at the gut. We constantly hear buzzwords about the gut microbiome, but Porges frames the gut in a much more visceral way. He calls it a toxin farm.
It's an intense but very accurate description. Your gut is a dark, complex environment cultivating massive amounts of bacteria and raising molecules that the body needs for digestion and immunity. But because it is a toxin farm, it requires constant, heavy surveillance.
Right, to make sure the toxins don't leak out.
Exactly. The primary security guard monitoring that farm is the vagus nerve.
It's a bidirectional highway. If your nervous system is locked in a defensive sympathetic state from work stress or trauma, it suppresses the digestive process, it ruins your gastrointestinal function.
It shuts down the non-essentials.
Right. And conversely, if your gut is inflamed from poor diet or illness, it sends massive threat signals up the vagus nerve to the brain, plunging you into anxiety. This perfectly explains why so many chronic GI issues, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic vomiting syndromes, are fundamentally rooted in autonomic dysregulation. You can't just take an antacid, you have to signal safety to the vagus nerve.
And this hardware connection extends far beyond the gut. Look at tinnitus, that constant, maddening ringing in the ears. Porges actually shares his own battle with us.
He had it.
Yes, he developed a severe case caused by an acoustic neuroma, which is a non-malignant tumor growing on his auditory nerve. He describes the sound not as a gentle, high-pitched hum, but as a violent, chaotic noise, like standing in a kitchen where people are aggressively smashing dishes on the floor.
Which would drive anyone insane.
Completely.
And the mainstream medical community essentially told him he had to undergo invasive surgery, and the likely outcome would be permanent hearing loss in that ear. But Porges, being the relentless researcher he is, dives into the medical literature instead of just accepting the surgery.
And he uncovers two crucial pieces of data regarding his own body. First, he tracked his symptoms and realized that tinnitus flared up significantly when he was under acute stress.
Okay, there's the nervous system link.
Second, he discovered that the underlying driver causing the tumor to express those chaotic symptoms was inflammation. And remember, inflammation is a core physical component of the body's sympathetic defensive state.
So instead of letting a surgeon cut the nerve, he applies his own theory. He starts taking massive doses of highly purified fish oil, which is a potent natural anti-inflammatory. By directly addressing the inflammation around the nerve, by lowering the physiological state of defense, the roaring tinnitus completely disappeared. He kept his hearing.
It's amazing. And he applied a very similar, highly mechanical biochemical logic to his cellular metabolism later in life.
When he had cancer, right?
Yes. When Porges was undergoing radiation treatment for prostate cancer, the radiation absolutely decimated his mitochondrial function. The mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cells. He was so metabolically wiped out that he physically could not walk up a single flight of stairs.
And his wife is actually a crucial part of this story. He is married to Sue Carter, who is a legendary endocrinologist in her own right. She is the scientist who originally discovered the link between the hormone oxytocin and mammalian social bonding.
Quite the power couple.
Truly. Together, they figured out that his extreme fatigue wasn't just a vague side effect of cancer. It was a specific mechanical failure of the mitochondria.
Right. To understand how they fixed it, we need a quick biology breakdown. The mitochondria produce a molecule called ATP.
ATP.
ATP is the literal energy currency of your cells. It's the battery power. But to make ATP, the mitochondria need fuel. Porges realized the radiation had damaged the transport system, so he starts taking specific supplements, L-carnitine and lecithin.
What do those do?
Think of L-carnitine as an armored delivery truck. Its job is to grab fatty acids and shuttle them directly through the mitochondrial wall so they can be burned for fuel.
He essentially flooded his cells with the exact chemical transport trucks needed to reboot ATP production. The very next day after starting this protocol, he is on an elliptical machine doing 2 miles. It was an instant mechanical fix.
It highlights a massive blind spot in the wellness world. You can do all the psychological therapy, all the EMDR, all the resonance breathing you want, but if you don't have the metabolic resources, the physical ATP, the neurotransmitter precursors, your nervous system literally lacks the chemical fuel required to rebuild that window of tolerance.
You absolutely must have both the physical hardware support and the autonomic signaling of safety.
Exactly.
Which brings up this incredibly fascinating evolutionary distinction Porges makes that bridges the physical and the social. It's the difference between ingestion and digestion.
Oh, this is so interesting.
Have you ever noticed that universally, across almost all human cultures, we love to eat food together, but we prefer to digest it in complete privacy?
It perfectly illustrates the division of the vagal system. Ingestion, the physical act of taking food into your mouth, chewing, tasting, swallowing, utilizes the exact same neural pathways and facial muscles as our social engagement system.
The myelinated ventral vagus.
Yes. This is why sharing a meal has been the primary ritual of community and diplomacy throughout human history. Sitting down to eat broadcasts a powerful biological signal. I have enough resources to relax and eat. I am putting my weapons down. There is no immediate threat.
But digestion, the slow, involuntary process of breaking that food down deep in the stomach and intestines, is governed by the ancient, unmyelinated dorsal vagus. It's a subterranean, highly private internal matter. We don't want an audience for it. This split shows how our bodies strictly segregate social safety from internal vulnerability.
And that concept of physical vulnerability dictates almost all of our subconscious body language. The source references Chase Hughes, a behavioral and body language expert. He points out a universal reflex. When people feel anxious, intimidated, or unsafe, they will subconsciously pull their arms in tightly against their torso, shielding their armpits and chest.
Right, because biologically, they are instinctively protecting the brachial artery under the arm and the entire ventral or belly side of their body. The ventral side houses all our vital soft organs.
Exactly.
So when a human being throws their arms wide open to greet you, or when a dog or cat rolls completely over onto its back and exposes its belly, it is the ultimate, undeniable biological signal of accessibility and safety. You cannot fake an open posture if your autonomic nervous system is genuinely terrified.
These primitive reflexes govern our microbehaviors in ways we barely notice. There's another brilliant anecdote in the interview about a criminal standing in a courtroom receiving a harsh prison sentence from a judge.
Oh, the lip-licking thing.
Yes. As the judge is reading the sentence, the criminal subtly pushes his tongue out past his teeth, licks his lips, and pulls it back in. Now, the casual observer would say, oh, his mouth is just dry from the adrenaline of the moment.
But from a developmental biology perspective, it goes so much deeper. A human baby's very first expression of no, long before they have the vocal cord control to speak, is physically pushing their tongue out to reject a nipple when they are full or distressed.
Right.
Even as fully grown adults facing extreme stress, when we lack agency, we unconsciously regress to these primitive infantile biological mechanisms to signal our distress and rejection of the environment.
It is wild to realize how much of our behavior is just ancient hardware running on autopilot, which forces us to zoom out and ask a terrifying question. If this is how intricately one individual's nervous system reacts to threat and safety, what happens when entire cultures or entire generations are systematically raised in environments that actively deny them ventral vagal safety?
This is where the macro implications of polyvagal theory just blow your mind. We start looking at transgenerational trauma, not just individual trauma. Porges uses the historical example of the elite boarding school system in the United Kingdom to illustrate this.
Right, the British boarding schools.
For generations, the cultural norm for the elite class was to take young children, 7 or 8 years old, strip them away from their families and their primary sources of maternal co-regulation, and place them in these incredibly rigid, austere, highly disciplined environments.
The stated goal of these institutions was to build stoic, unshakable leaders. The stiff upper lip. The idea was that hardship creates resilience.
Tough love.
But physiologically, based on everything we've discussed, what you are actually doing is locking those children's developing bodies into a permanent, chronic state of defense. You are actively rewarding emotional suppression and punishing vulnerability.
And the tragic downstream result is that these individuals grow up to become prime ministers, generals, and corporate titans. But their biological capacity for true empathetic compassion has been severely stunted. They function entirely out of a sense of duty, rigid structure, and for queen and country, rather than out of genuine human connection.
Because the hardware isn't there.
Because their nervous systems simply never received the safety signals required to fully develop the neural pathways for deep empathy.
It is a sobering way to view history. And we see the downstream effects of this societal fear of vulnerability everywhere, but it is perhaps most glaringly obvious at the very end of life. Chris Williamson notes in the interview that out of over 1,000 podcast episodes he has recorded, less than 10 have even touched on the topic of end-of-life or palliative care.
We are a culture entirely obsessed with prolonging biological life at all costs, driven entirely by a terror of dying. We hook people up to machines to keep the organs pumping, rather than providing the psychological and environmental tools that would allow people to biologically relax, feel a profound sense of safety, smile, and peacefully wave goodbye at the end of their duration here.
It reveals a profound societal dysregulation. We invest all of our cultural energy, our science, and our money into the startup phase of life youth, acquisition, physical growth, optimization.
The startup versus mature company analogy.
Yes. As Arthur Brooks points out in the source material, ageism is arguably the last universally accepted prejudice in modern society. We marginalize and isolate the elderly because their physical frailty acts as a mirror. It reminds our own defensive nervous systems of our ultimate inescapable vulnerability. We literally do not want to look at it.
But looking at it, facing that true vulnerability, might be the only way to actually heal our nervous systems. I want to share this incredibly deep reflection from the source that ties all of this together. Chris Williamson is talking to a friend of his in Bali, expressing his sheer frustration and despair about his endless battles with long COVID and chronic illness. He's exhausted from trying to be stoic and strong.
Yeah.
And his friend says to him, "You cannot fully understand humanity until you go through a period of life-changing suffering where you genuinely do not know if you will ever get better." It is a devastating but profound truth. Going through a hard time losing a job, going through a bad breakup, failing a test, is a common human experience. But the true, terrifying vulnerability of an endless physical breakdown where the narrative of your own future is entirely erased forces a completely different kind of psychological evolution. It forces the birth of radical compassion. Because once your own nervous system has been completely shattered, once you have intimately felt that absolute loss of physical resilience and agency, you look at the entire world differently. You look at the chronically ill or the addicted or the marginalized, and you have instant cellular empathy.
You feel it in your body.
But even more profoundly, you look at the incredibly annoying, narcissistic, hyper-competitive people in the world, the ones who usually make you angry, and instead of judging them, you realize that their toxic behavior is just an echo of an early nervous system injury.
You see through the personality label. You realize they are just biological organisms frantically flailing around, trying to accumulate wealth or power to find safety in an environment they fundamentally perceive as dangerous.
Exactly.
When your own nervous system finally achieves true safety, you don't become lazy or complacent, like the grind culture gurus warn. You actually gain the physiological capacity to truly see, understand, and love others.
Okay, let's bring this massive journey all together. What is the ultimate takeaway? We are not just rational minds driving meat suits. We are deeply complex, highly evolved biological systems that are desperately, constantly scanning our environment for signals of safety.
Yes.
The modern grind culture, this relentless push to ignore our bodily signals, fundamentally breaks our Exactly. Instead, look at your environment. Ask yourself, is my nervous system currently receiving biological signals of safety? And just as importantly, am I broadcasting signals of safety to the people around me? By understanding your physiology, you regain access to your true capacities.
It is the ultimate shift from self-criticism to self-compassion.
It really is. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day based on everything we've just unpacked. If our very capacity for empathy, connection, and rational thought is fundamentally dictated by the biological safety of our nervous system, how much of our global political and social conflict right now is literally just an epidemic of dysregulated, highly inflamed nervous systems screaming at each other?
Wow.
And if that is true, could the ultimate tool for world peace simply be learning how to regulate our own bodies first? Maybe, just maybe, it all starts with realizing we are all just highly intelligent plants, desperately looking for a safe place to put down roots.